Cyberpunk 2077, one of the most hyped games of all time. CD Projekt Red really builds up their reputation with, of course, the Witcher series, and their take on the cyberpunk genre was really highly anticipated to be a very ambitious title from not only the graphics, but also the experience. Now, we've known about the development for this game for really a long time, a very long time. And with the numerous amounts of delays, I was pulled in different directions when I finally got to sit down in the office and play the hell out of this game in its entirety. But I like to do thorough reviews, so this isn't just me playing through the main story, flying through it on games journalist difficulty for the sake of rushing out a review. Nope, this is after 170 plus hours, completion of all the side jobs and gigs, and even going through a few different endings, and all while playing on very hard. So does this game live up to the hype? Is it worth buying? And who is this game for? These questions I'm going to try to attempt to answer, I guess, with this review. Now, I will say right out the gate, like I normally say, I do not do spoiler-free reviews. So if that's your thing, don't watch this. It is inevitable that I will say something that may spoil some of the plot points. However, I will not break down the entirety of the plot, and the gameplay that I'll be showing for the most part will be limited to driving around as well as doing some of the side jobs, not necessarily the main story. So let's jump into it. I want you to keep in mind that all of the gameplay that you'll be seeing is my own. Unless stated otherwise, it was captured on 4K resolution. The ray tracing is on medium with a few things off, and most of the other settings range from medium to ultra. I also have the DLSS settings on performance. Though I have a unit with a 2080, which I did test this game on, this footage is all captured from my unit that has an i9900K and a Titan RTX. With all of this being said, before we get started, let's talk about all of the stuff and all of the issues relating to performance and the controversy surrounding the release of this game. The reason why I want to get this stuff out of the way is because I want to be able to separate the game itself from those performance issues, because I'd imagine at some point those issues are going to be patched and fixed, and I want the review to remain helpful for some of you. But the issues surrounding this game are too heavy to ignore, and considering even my own experience, it is worth mentioning. It is no secret that the release of this game has been an absolute disaster, and this game should not have been released for purchase in this state. I got the game on the PlayStation 5 initially because, well, I wanted to see how it ran on a system I just bought, and I also don't normally stream PC games because I don't want the usage of my GPU and CPU being split between the game and the capture. The initial point and initial thing that I plan to do was stream the entirety of this game. This is why I generally stream games on console though, and I game on PC offline. Keep in mind that when you have the game on PlayStation 5, you're playing the PS4 Pro enhanced version, as the next gen version of the Cyberpunk game isn't even out yet. And though the game didn't look terrible, it was virtually unplayable considering how many times it crashed on me even after the initial patches. You can check the vlog, which is still up on my Twitch streams, to see this thing crashing 4 to 5 times per session, and it took me right out of the game. And you of course know how bad it was for people on base consoles. I hope you've seen all the footage and you're not too oblivious. That is, unless you've been living under a rock. Some of the frame rate issues are inexcusable, and how bad it looks is completely unacceptable. I played many games over the course of this current generation, and no game I've ever owned for this current generation has crashed on me the amount of times that Cyberpunk has. Now, for some reason, in protection of CD Projekt Red, some people have the nerve to blame the consumers or completely dismiss everybody else's experience because they supposedly had it run fine for them. Even when I've documented my PS5 crashes, some weirdos have said things like, why would you even play this game on anything other than a PC? This is an idiotic response considering the game was sold on both PS4 and Xbox while also being advertised for those consoles, as it was developed through much of the console's cycle. It is not the fault of the owner of those consoles that CD Projekt Red put out a product that either didn't work or looked terrible because it simply was not optimized. Remember that we wouldn't even be talking about next gen consoles if they hadn't continuously pushed this game back. As I've documented though in previous videos in an investor call, they flat out admitted that they ignored the signs that this game was having issues. This comes after they claimed it ran surprisingly well on console. And this is why damage control is being done, and both Microsoft and Sony are offering full refunds while altering their refund policies. The latter completely removed it from the store, and I do not blame them for not wanting to be caught up in the middle of this, because there's potential lawsuits that are going to be flying all over the place, considering that the shady business practices seem to exist here. Either way, if CD Projekt Red sought to put it up for purchase on the PS4 or the Xbox, then it should work. Nobody cares that you claim to not have an issue on your PC or even on your console version of the game, because the issues are that widespread enough for it to be alarming. But that's the thing. The game isn't optimized for PC either. It just doesn't crash as much, and of course you can get it to look better. I'm sure you've seen people trying to run this game, even on a 3090, and it's bringing the GPU to its knees, specifically when you are in populated areas. So sure, it's playable, but you're certainly going to have to move the settings around to get the thing to play at like 60 frames on average. Good luck with that, if you're lucky, unless you have a higher end graphics card. Of course, 4K with decent settings is out of the question to get a solid frame rate for, but it doesn't run the greatest on 1440 or 1080p either. DLSS settings, they're basically required. You got to put that bad boy on, and you're going to have to dumb the game down, but you're not going to get any consistency anyway, as when you get in populated areas, the frames drop significantly and the game just runs differently. In other words, you may have to put the game on potato settings depending on what card you have. By CD Projekt Red's own recommended system requirements, it's all junk. In addition to this, the game is just overall very buggy. At the time, at least when it was released, the amount of random T-poses that I get from NPCs is ridiculous, but it's the audio and UI bugs that drove me absolutely crazy. I cannot count the amount of times I had to restart from the last save point because I had some text or some visual cue stuck on my screen well beyond the time that it was supposed to have gone away. Cars randomly explode, and me not being able to even complete certain missions is just overall annoying, and it takes you right out of it. And that's why, if you're watching this review not long after this game was released, or rather like 10 or so days after it was released, I don't care what system you're on. Wait for this game to be patched before you buy it. On performance alone, I would not recommend playing it in this state if you don't have to and you got something else to play. Give them some time to hopefully get the bugs cleared up and get this bad boy optimized. CD Projekt Red deserves all of the criticism though that they got coming their way, and I have no desire to sit here and make excuses for them. Other games having rocky releases is not an excuse. Now that we've got that out the way, how does this game feel? What is it about? When you are able to play it, what should you expect? The story. Let's finally go over all of that. In Cyberpunk 2077, you are V. Doesn't matter what gender you make the character, that's your name. They don't even bother to really explain why that's your name, but it should be painfully obvious. They just needed a gender neutral name so that all of the dialogue can flow and the other characters can actually address you. Reminds me a lot of what they do with 2K's little stupid stories. Anyway, the first thing you do in Cyberpunk is create your character. The customization options are kind of lackluster, to be honest, but I suppose they didn't want to put too much into it because the game is played in first person. So unless you're in photo mode, driving in third person, like on a motorcycle, you're looking in the mirror, or you're like editing your character in the menu, you rarely ever will see your character. There's more genital customization than anything, which is stupid considering you can't even change your body type. There's no revisiting this little menu, and there's nothing in game that will like change your actual physical appearance aside from the clothing, or if you give yourself some sort of cyberware enhancements like gorilla arms or something like that, which we'll discuss. But everybody just like uber slender sort of figure. There's no way out of that. In addition to all of that, you select one of 3 life paths. And to be honest, this doesn't do much but change your really starting cinematic experience, like where you came from. And that'll give you some things to say as well that are unique to that life path as you experience the game. Now, I chose Corpo, so there were instances where I could respond like that, but you never get the feeling that this changes your game. Even when you do say that, or you say something a Corpo would say, it's not like it changes anything. It just gives you some different dialogue options. Once all of this is selected, though, you're thrown into the game in which you're given perspective of what is going on. I'm sure you've picked up most of this stuff by way of the trailers or the promotional videos that CD Projekt Red put out. But the long story short, I guess, is you get stuck with an engram in your head that basically has the soul of Johnny Silverhand, which is the character that Keanu Reeves plays. He's a rocker boy from the 2020s, and though 50 years after the fact, some of his folks are still alive and kicking. They just have like grayer hair. You'll see some of them and even can do some missions with that are surrounding some of those guys. Now, I suppose the cybernetic enhancement, they extend their lifespan or what have you, but this engram is slowly killing you as well, and you spend the entire game trying to find out really a way to stop it. So Johnny is basically with you throughout the entirety of the game, and he pops up at random places, kind of like what happened with Joker in one of the Arkham games. And depending on what you do, there's a few instances where Johnny actually takes control of your body. Now, I want to talk more about the story a little later, but let's first talk about what you're dealing with in the menus and some of the more RPG aspects of this game, because that was supposed to be the big lure of it. So this is the main menu that you'll be in on Cyberpunk, and at the top left you can see that there's 2 level progression systems, one being your basic level, the other being your street level. The base level is as you expect. You're leveling up after completing certain missions or certain just things really in general, and then you collect the XP. Each level up really gets you a skill point, and I believe 3 level ups, if I'm not mistaken, grant you then an attribute point. This will all make sense soon. I'll explain. But the 3 sections at the top just really tell you the progression of the game, and then you have the crafting, the inventory, the map, the character, and the journal, and an option to skip time. Now, in the crafting section, you're able to craft new weapons that scale with your level, but you'll basically need to find or buy the blueprints really to craft those items. Now, you can craft everything from weapons to clothing, which I really enjoy. In this section, you'll also be able to upgrade your items if you have the items that you need to craft, more so in upgrading those weapons or clothing. And you can, of course, collect those throughout the loot that you get off of bodies and little crates and what have you. And you can also purchase those items from vendors. Now, the inventory section is where you'll be swapping out your weapons, your gear, and your quick access items. There's a level of detail that I appreciate, or I can appreciate, with the weapons, as they don't all really do the same thing. Of course, as you'd expect, they differ in level, and whether they're legendary or iconic weapons, actually, that seems to matter. And it gives you a lot more options in terms of the customization. And those weapon mods actually matter because they alter the stats. Basically, the game doesn't pigeonhole you into a type of weapon that you must use all the time. I was a more rifle and shotgun guy, and once I found the ones I liked, I just kept upgrading them. If you wanted to, let's say, go the pistol and submachine gun route, though, you can do that too. Pull out the sniper even. There's also clothing mods as well that you'll be able to apply to the clothes that you get They do change your stats. The clothes themselves change your stats, and the mods change your stats, and everything in the game. Well, not everything. Most everything can be dismantled, and you can use those items that you got from dismantling them to upgrade if you want to do that. There's no special crafting station or anything. You can do all of this on the fly. That sort of takes away the immersion for me, but this inventory section is also where you can check out your stats, everything in your backpack, as well as check out the cyberware that you have. Now, unlike the weapons and the clothes, though, you cannot upgrade or swap those out on the fly. You'll need to go see a Ripper Doc. The only thing that you can swap out are the mods for the cyberware. The map is pretty standard, as you can see all of your jobs and things that you can do around Night City, which isn't much. It's actually smaller than I anticipated. The character section is where, though, you'll be able to level up your base stats and apply the different perks. The thing that I like about this is that almost nobody will be able to max this thing out upon completion of the game, so you'll have to choose what kind of character you want to be. I was always going in loud. I said I would do that initially, so I applied almost nothing to my stealth attributes. Having certain stats, however, does impact your gameplay in more ways than just the action, but also in, for example, being able to open a door, or really open a door at all. The journal is where you're going to be able to see all of your main jobs, your side jobs, and other gigs, as well as rides that are being sold. You'll be able to read your text messages here as well, and the shards, which are nothing but items that give you perspective on some of the lore general area that you collected it from. And the tarot cards, they're just part of this side mission, don't really do anything. And to complete the menu, there's a database section that will also help you with some of the lore, and you can learn about some of the characters they have, like paragraph breakdowns and what have you. So let's make this all make sense by talking about the gameplay. You are thrown into Night City, and you'll need to really work through this very long intro before the world really opens up for you. Once that's over with, though, you can basically fly through the main story, or you can complete the side quests and the side jobs and the gigs, missions, and what have you. For the most part, only a few side gigs will need to have you progress the main story in order to unlock, but the interlude is just a really long big tutorial that's designed to make the world that you're in make sense. After that, it's up to you in terms of the pace. So I jumped into doing a bunch of side missions and gigs. As far as gameplay, let's talk about the weaponry and the cybernetic enhancements first. You'll generally be going from place to place doing different things to complete missions, of course, but there's a main gameplay loop that consists of going to a base of some sort with enemies being there, and you decide how you want to take them down. This is very much a first-person shooter in that aspect. There's no denying that. You just have other things at your disposal. Do you want to take the enemies down with stealth? Well, you can throw on like a suppressor of sorts on your weapon. You can utilize various quick hacks that will distract enemies and even kill your enemy depending on what you're using. The perks are also very significant in that play style, as they unlock different moves and things that you're able to do. So the attributes are going to be key to the type of gameplay you're going to be experiencing. That's what I do appreciate about this game. It does not attempt to pigeonhole you, like I said earlier, into a certain way that you must play. You want to go about completion of quests, same thing, go at your own pace. Sure, they all have things that they need you to do, but the experience can be different depending on how you built your character. They added this sort of aspect of melee weapons and melee combat. It's also very cool, as it will allow you to slice and dice with a katana, a sword if you want to. You can expect this sort of with RPGs, but they don't always pull this off. Unfortunately, this is about the only RPG element of this game, which we'll discuss a little later on. The gunplay, it does feel, let's say, decent. And I do like the variation of said weapons. Like I said before, some you can charge, for example, and you can shoot through certain parts of the environment to get an enemy. You could quick hack with certain ocular systems, and operating system will determine what all you can do while you're doing those quick hacks, how often you can do them, so forth. So you can do everything from disable cameras to distracting enemies to actually having them kill themselves. The choice of the approach is yours, and much of the gameplay loop is driving place to place to do just that. Go to an area they want you to, eliminate enemies, take an item, install some malware, get out. But you're given all sorts of variety in which I guess that determines how you want to go about that. Having said all of this, I will say that putting the game in first person was actually a fantastic idea, and I was skeptical at first of this approach. It works well, believe it or not, with the combat system. The driving, however, is not the best part of this game. The driving itself can be really slippery. Doesn't matter what you're using. There isn't much consequence also to driving bad. The cars just take all sorts of damage, and you'll have to be hauling ass into a complete stop to even fly off of a motorcycle if you're on it. But I suppose it's good enough to get from point A to point B. It just clearly wasn't a priority. There is a ridiculous amount of vehicles, though, which doesn't make sense, that you can purchase, but they're just there, and you can get some solid vehicles that you can keep by just completing some of the side missions. I never purchased a vehicle in my 171 hours that I initially played. You know, they didn't focus much on the vehicle aspect because you can't even shoot out of a vehicle unless you're in the passenger seat of that vehicle, or let's say the vehicle actually has a gun or something attached to it. There's not many races as well, which you thought this game would have been primed for that, aside from like this one mission chain. So combat and driving, that's out of the way. We've taken care of that. So who are you fighting, and where are you driving to? In Night City, that depends on, of course, the mission. Most of the jobs that you will get, they'll come from fixers, or in the form of fixers. Now, fixers are the people with various jobs needing to be done around the city. They are basically pimps. All the jobs that people need runs through them. You're basically a merc for hire, and the fixer is the middle man. They'll have you do all sorts of things in the gameplay loop that I just mentioned, and not always will they want you to just kill a target. Sometimes they want you to just take down the target, knock them out. There's weapons that you can turn into non-lethal. There's, of course, melee weapons that are non-lethal that you can use, and that will determine your success on that mission. The game does a great job of giving you some variation to utilize the various gameplay mechanics. This is even more so with the actual side gigs that you do that come from the characters that aren't necessarily fixers. Some of it can be actual detective work, which is really cool. You use your eye to scan certain items for clues, and that makes for a solid change of pace. So the missions, though you may do similar things, they don't feel redundant. This is actually, to me, the biggest strength of the game. There's no real shortage of content in that regards. They did a great job with the variation of jobs and such that the main story actually pales in comparison. In many cases, the side jobs and gigs are better than the main story. But this in some ways created issues which we'll have to go over at some point. I'd like to add, though, that there isn't much of anything to do outside of the missions. Exploring the city is rather pointless. The things on the maps that aren't jobs are just places you can buy things like weapons and the Ripper docks. Yes, the game looks very good, but this brings me to the next point, and that's the liveliness of Night City. The absolute worst part of the game are the NPCs. GTA 3 had better AI than this. They're incredibly stupid, and they do things such as sit in the middle of the road with their heads covered if you happen to start shooting. They feel like straight up zombies, and for a game that tries to emphasize their immersiveness, is that even a word? They certainly dropped the ball there. The AI makes the city feel cheap since they're so stupid. This seemed like this was going to be this true experience that push the boundaries with its world, but it doesn't. The AI is just there, and if they aren't specifically there to be interacted with, they're zombies. I don't even know why they added this whole talk aspect. Press square to talk if you're playing on a controller like I did. All that happens is they say a one-liner that often has nothing to do with anything going on. It's just there for an audio cue. And if they aren't there as part of a gang or something, they won't even defend themselves, even if you take their car. Because of this, Night City doesn't really feel alive. More just an existing plane that the missions are in. And that's about it. Even the cops are silly, as despite having all of this tech, you can get away without no problems, absolute ease, no matter how many stars you have on you. As you hear me talk more and more about this game, you can sense the disappointment, but also pointing towards the potential that this game had or what it could have been. I also failed to mention the loot. That's a big thing, of course, with RPGs. But the loot, most of it, it's useless. I guess that can be said for a lot of games. But I will give the game props for its economy, as it never feels like you have more money than you can spend, and it makes you have to do things within the game, play the game in order to get money to buy things, especially the expensive enhancements. So they did a great job with its economy. So you may be confused at the point that I made about the side quests and the content being the best part of the game, while mentioning that it also created problems. Well, that's in relation to the main story. It almost feels like at some point the game pivoted from an RPG to an action adventure game that happened to be open world. I should have known that this was a possibility with the addition of Keanu Reeves. That should have been on the horizon. Should have expected that. As normally I would have been alarmed anyway if a game sought to get megastars to be a part of their voice casting. I'm sure that cost them a fortune, and to be honest, it's a wasted effort because it's a video game after all, and I don't know anybody other than normies that would buy a game specifically because Keanu Reeves was in it. But they clearly wanted to get the most out of him. I expected this to be, though, a true essence of an open world RPG with decision making, though, that mattered, that created these unique scenarios. I don't think that this is an unrealistic expectation, considering how long this game was in development and how ambitious it pretended to be, how they even touted the decision making. And with the customization, these are the type of games that I gravitate towards now that I'm older. I don't want my hand held through the entirety of the game. I don't want to play an interactive movie, but unfortunately, that's exactly what the main story is, and it pigeonholes you into that. This is always going to be a risk with games that have that vocal dialogue, is there's only so much time and there's only so many things they can get you to say, especially if they're paying them millions of dollars, like they were probably paying Keanu Reeves. But that severely hurt this game because it makes it very linear and makes much of the side quests that you do, if you do choose to do them, completely irrelevant. It only matters in the sense that it can level up your character. Yet again, another game suffers because of this generation's obsession with accessibility. They want to make games that try to appeal to the widest demographic, often the most like the lowest common denominator, which doesn't necessarily make for a good game. It feels like they wanted to make a game that normies could pick up. They wanted to play an interactive movie that may be their thing, especially those journalists. They could fly right through it. A game's journalist's favorite type of game. And now it makes sense as to why they carried so much water for this game. You can get through the main story in like 2 days if you have long sessions. And again, because the game has to work towards that ending, that Keanu Reeves inspired ending. It basically nullifies most of the side quests and the relationships because of it. Some of the best aspects in general aren't even thoroughly explored, such as the brain dance thing that they hyped up. Very seldom even use that in the game. They're largely just referenced by the characters, BDs, as a thing that exists. The dialogue, decision making, and the relationship aspects of this game, they're largely overstated. It's more about saying different things to reach the same conclusion. There are certain side quests in which the decision making does end up in different results, but ultimately there's no consequence one way or the other. Let's say you had an option to kill a character or not during this side gig. The only thing that may result in is a different dialogue option where another character acknowledges that this happens. But the result of that death has no bearing on the relationship between you and the character, and they walk away all the same as if you killed them or you didn't kill them, and it wouldn't have mattered. This is painfully obvious because there's this one character that they give you an option to kiss at some point, because he's either gay or bisexual. And even after I specifically took the option to say I had no desire to do anything with him and I toasted to a friendship with a friggin' lemonade, my character wakes up the next morning as if he got drunk and was throwing up, and then I get a text from that other character acting like we did something last night. And the chick that I did take the option of having some sort of romantic relationship with, that's meaningless, as being romantically involved does not grant you really anything. You don't get to call them up to help you out with a mission or something like that. Sure, if you complete that particular mission chain that I'm referencing, it unlocks a potential ending, but the romance itself is meaningless. You don't even get a lot of romantic options, as there's only like one or two characters that you can be involved with. And I think that it depends on your gender. So I'll put it like this. The decision making and dialogue exists, but it's extremely linear, and most of it changes nothing because you have to get to the same place. Your life path will choose like your intro, and if you complete a couple of the mission chains that are side gigs, you can unlock a couple of additional like ending types, but they're very similar. It's basically a big raid at the end where you're giving a choice: blue pill, red pill, fork in the road. Vast majority of what you do in this game, though, as it pertains to the side gigs, it matters not at all to the plot. The decision making at the end are the ones that have like the most consequences, as they'll show you something different cinematically. But you'll get there regardless of what you do. You can't even play the game with the consequences of your ending decision. And you make a decision at the end, you think it's supposed to be this big deal. You can't even play out your consequences. Once you complete it, you get the option of starting a new game or being kicked back to the point before the final mission, which allows you to basically see a couple of different endings. That was really disappointing, because there's a couple of decisions that I made that I was like, oh yeah, let's see how the world at least turned out for the time being. Nope, can't even do any of that. Look, I want to be very clear. I do not believe that this is a bad game. It looks great, but it is disappointing if you went in thinking that you were going to get this boundary pushing RPG. The gameplay mechanics have been already done by other games. It just uses this decision-making thing throughout the dialogue as a gimmick, because for the most part, your actions mean nothing because it all has to work to that main storyline with Keanu Reeves. I think that they could have done a lot if they left Keanu's storyline as a side quest, because as it stands, it's just a sandbox with all of these different things to do, and it's more of an action adventure game than an RPG. It almost feels like they went for the RPG route, and then, like I said, some exec maybe, they said we need star power. They completely pivoted from the original concept. The main story is just an interactive movie that you can fly right through, and maybe they did this because people like the normies, they want their accessibility, they got that obsession, and they griped maybe about games like The Witcher, about it being too long or something like that. They have these short attention spans and that dopamine fix that they need, and they need to get everything finished in the shortest time possible. As you can tell, I am so over the interactive movie games. If you want a cool little short action adventure game with things that you can do to extend the gameplay on the side, I mean, you have to do that before the last mission, of course. Look, this will be a game that you may enjoy. But if this is a game you went in thinking this is going to be this highly customizable, groundbreaking RPG, you need to reel in your expectations. Under no circumstance would I say that this is a bad game. It's just a disappointing one that simply does not even get close to living to the hype. And I have no desire to replay it. You can argue that the trailers are almost always misleading, but the fact that, like that underwater footage, for example, they show is literally the only time that you're ever underwater, that's more than misleading. I do not hate this game. I had a lot of fun, and much of my criticism is about the anticipation compared to the result. We're still going to be waiting, maybe even for Rockstar, if they ever decide to get off GTA Online and want to come out with another one. Next gen experience might not come along until they give it another shot. This just doesn't feel like a game that took 8 or so years to actually create, in my honest opinion, or maybe that set my expectation up way too high because it's not nearly as ambitious as a title as I was expecting. But there's a big positive that came from this that I have to mention. I'm very intrigued by the concept of the Cyberpunk universe. I do want to know more about it. I want to get more knowledge on it, the lore. But after playing this game, I'm so excited for Cyberpunk Online. I told y'all before the game came out, I was actually more excited for that than the base Cyberpunk. I just knew it was coming at a way later date. And that may actually be the chance for them to redeem themselves, CD Projekt Red that is, and give us a true endless RPG that's in it for the long haul. They'll for sure have to ditch what is considered the current gen right now, but I believe Cyberpunk Online, if going about it the proper route, that has the chance to be this groundbreaking experience if they can somehow take the decent aspects of the game and bring it to an online MMORPG setting. I'm not saying make GTA Online with a Cyberpunk skin, no, but rather an actual MMORPG that attempts to have that live response sort of gameplay, be an MMORPG, embrace that, know what it is, make it endless, make it grindy. I know y'all hate that, but that's what I want. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but Cyberpunk Online is certainly on my radar. I hope you enjoyed the video, man. If you have any questions, please be sure to drop them in the comment section wherever you're watching this video. I will be sure to respond. And until next time, y'all be easy. Peace.